evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes? It truly is an honor to be here tonight. It is an honor for me personally because I too am an immigrant who came to Canada 44 years ago. And yes, it's been a very long time, and Canada has changed over those 44 years. But I think the journey for me 44 years ago was as difficult and as challenging as it is for many newcomers who come to Canada today. 44 years ago, I moved from the city of Bombay, of 10 million people, to a tiny mining town of 10,000 people. And let me tell you about my first experience. I had arrived in Canada to get married to my husband, who was a geologist. We were to be married in the Laurentian Mountains at the yoga ashram of Sri Shivananda. So I arrived as a young woman to be married, but the morning of the wedding, these beautiful snowflakes appear. And I had, of course, never seen snow before. So I tripped out of the room quietly to enjoy the snow. And there was a frantic search for this bride who was nowhere on the scene. And many hours later, they found me and reminded me that it was time to get married. But from then on, I took a train from Winnipeg to Thompson, Manitoba. And I don't know how many of you would have experienced that, because it has to be the most desolate, frightening journey that anybody can make. It was the 1st of November. It was a scary journey. All around me was the landscape blanketed in white, and absolutely, absolutely no cities or towns that we passed through. It was this long journey up to the north of Canada. And then, of course, I look around when I arrive in this mining town, and suddenly there's 7 feet banks of snow, and it is 45 degrees below zero the day I arrived in Thompson. Well, I was ready for that experience, and I think, like many of you who have forged such wonderful lives for yourself here, despite the many challenges you might have faced, I think, like every one of you, I took on this challenge with a great sense of appreciation for this incredible country that was to be my new home. I experienced the kind of friendship, the kind of warmth, and I never expected that. Because for some reason, a lot of people saw me in my sari, and there was a sense of, how do we approach her? She doesn't speak the language. Well, little did they know that I had studied in India in an Irish convent school. And of course, the English was almost my first language. But then once that barrier was crossed, I very quickly became part of that community. And that's where I learned how to bowl, I learned how to ski, I learned how to ice fish, I learned how to curl. And truly, looking back at that experience, I feel it kind of forged my Canadian identity. It forged who I am as part of this incredibly vast country. It is an experience that I think is denied to many newcomers who arrive in perhaps southern Ontario or some other southern parts of Canada. I think we don't have an opportunity to experience the vastness of Canada. We don't have an opportunity to experience the First Nations community, which I did quite intimately in my life in Thompson, Manitoba. And as a result of that, and also added to the fact that when we come into larger cities, there is already the safety net of your own cultural community. So there almost is no need to go beyond that and experience and make the experience of integrating into the mainstream community. And yes, there are challenges. I'm not minimizing the fact that there are any. But I think if we approach it with a sense of curiosity, with a sense of adventure, it is in the attitude, and a lot can be accomplished. It was referred to earlier in the introduction that Padmini Raju made, that I experienced a terrible tragedy in my life. Little did I know in 1964 that I would indeed be the victim of one of Canada's worst acts of aviation terrorism. For too long, Canada had seen 9/11 as one of the world's worst aviation disasters. But I think Canadians forgot that they had indeed experienced their own act of terrorism in 1985, when the Air India flight carrying 289 Canadians, majority of those on that flight were Canadian citizens traveling to India. It happened to be Air India. The people were brown people on that flight. It was, you know, from Toronto, it was going to India. It crashed off the coast of Ireland. It happened because of some ill-founded ideology that certain people believed in and believed that they needed to bring this flight down. All these things were not part of our Canadian mainstream. So why would you think of it as being a Canadian tragedy? I don't think Canada can afford to look at that kind of incident in that manner anymore. We are a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of extremely rich and dynamic cultural diversity. So while we celebrate all those wonderful things about that cultural diversity, we need to also understand that there will be some ugliness from time to time. We need to be prepared for it. We need to be vigilant about it. But what disappointed most of us who were from the community that had suffered this tragedy was the complete inept attitude of the Canadian government. Right from day one after the tragedy, it was never seen as something that the government had to take responsibility for. We must remember that there was a growing, unspoken, but definitely known in the law enforcement agencies, that there was a lot of fundamentalism that was growing against the Indian government. And the law enforcement agencies, including the RCMP and CSIS, knew about this. They knew about the Air India flights being targeted, but did nothing about it. It was a sense of apathy, it was a sense of lack of cultural sensitivity, and definitely, I think, an aptitude on their part that many RCMP officers themselves have acknowledged as having dropped the ball on this one. So then, despite the knowledge about the conspiracy, the flight was left to leave. And then, of course, the tragedy occurred. So you think one great tragedy had occurred, but then there were many to follow, because the investigation following this tragedy was something that completely devastated not only the families of the victims, but many Canadians, because it was inexcusable and unforgivable, the kind of lack of understanding, lack of